At a liquidation auction inside Carter Dynamics headquarters, CEO Madison Blake pointed towards 6 burned-out industrial motors and smiled as the entire room turned to look at Ryan Cole. The motors were blackened by fire, covered in rust, and so badly damaged that most buyers would not have taken them for free. Then Madison made a joke. She announced that the 6 dead motors were the perfect purchase for a man who had built his reputation fixing things nobody else wanted. Laughter spread across the room. Some people laughed because the joke was funny. Others laughed because Madison Blake was the one telling it. Ryan sat quietly through all of it. A struggling single father. A former engineer whose career had been destroyed years earlier. A man who had lost his position, his reputation, and almost every opportunity he had ever worked for. When the auction ended, the 6 motors were sold to him for just $1. What nobody in that room knew was that hidden inside those burned shells was a secret Carter Dynamics had spent years trying to bury, a secret worth far more than anyone could imagine. And over the next few years, those 6 broken motors would help Ryan build a company valued at $500 million. They would expose a lie that had ruined his life, and they would force some of the most powerful people in the industry to face the truth they thought had disappeared forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and let us know in the comments. What would you do if the people who laughed at you accidentally handed you the opportunity of a lifetime? Now let's begin Ryan Cole's incredible story. Ryan Cole had not always been the man people looked down on. Years earlier, he had been one of the most promising engineers at Carter Dynamics. When difficult technical problems appeared, senior staff often turned to him for solutions. Ryan was intelligent, hardworking, and deeply committed to his work. He believed that innovation could solve problems that others considered impossible. During that time, he developed a new thermal management system for high-performance industrial motors. The design was intended to reduce overheating and improve efficiency. It was one of the most ambitious projects the company had ever explored. Then everything changed. During a major test, a fire broke out inside the testing facility. Within weeks, the project was shut down. Ryan was called into a brief meeting and informed that he was responsible for the failure. According to the official report, he had deviated from approved specifications and caused the accident. The company terminated his position almost immediately. His reputation disappeared overnight. Potential employers stopped returning his calls. Former colleagues avoided him. The career he had spent years building collapsed faster than he ever thought possible. What troubled him most was that none of it made sense. Ryan had reviewed his work countless times and could never find evidence proving he had caused the failure. Important testing records vanished shortly after the accident. Critical data simply disappeared from company servers. Without documentation and without the resources to fight a billion-dollar corporation, he had no way to defend himself. Eventually, reality forced him to move on. He opened a small repair workshop on the edge of town, fixing aging motors, generators, pumps, and industrial equipment for local businesses. The work paid the bills, but barely. Some months were better than others. Most were not. His workshop had fallen 3 months behind on rent, and each passing week brought him closer to losing the only business he had left. But Ryan was no longer fighting only for himself. He was raising his daughter, Hannah. A small photograph of the 2 of them sat on his workbench every day. Whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he looked at that picture and reminded himself why he kept going. Every repaired machine, every late night, every difficult customer, every unpaid invoice. It was all for Hannah's future. Over the years, Ryan stopped dreaming about returning to the world that had rejected him. He no longer wanted recognition or corporate success. He wanted something simpler, a stable life, a roof over his daughter's head, and enough work to keep moving forward. That was why he attended the liquidation auction at Carter Dynamics. He wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply hoped to find a few affordable industrial motors that could help keep his struggling workshop alive. Instead, he walked directly into the room where his life had once fallen apart. And before the day was over, the people responsible for his humiliation would unknowingly place the first piece of his future directly into his hands. The auction floor inside CorporateDrama's headquarters was filled with contractors, engineers, and equipment buyers searching for bargains. Ryan chose a seat near the back of the room. He had no interest in attracting attention. He was there for one reason only. His workshop was running out of time. If he could purchase a few affordable industrial motors, he might be able to keep the business alive long enough to recover financially. For a while, everything proceeded normally. Then Madison Blake entered the room. The chief executive carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years being the most powerful person in every room she entered. She greeted board members and investors while the auction continued. For long, she noticed Ryan. A small smile appeared on her face. She knew exactly who he was. Most people in the industry did. To many, Ryan Cole was remembered as the engineer whose career had ended in failure years ago. Madison saw an opportunity. When Ryan raised his hand to bid on a modest group of working motors, she interrupted the process and directed attention toward a different lot entirely. Several employees rolled a cart into the center of the room. On it sat 6 massive industrial motors. Every one of them was badly damaged. Their metal casings were blackened from fire. Rust covered large portions of the surface. They looked more like scrap metal than equipment. Madison smiled as the room watched. She announced that the 6 motors seemed perfect for a man who specialized in fixing things nobody else wanted. The room erupted with laughter. Some people glanced at Ryan. Others openly stared. A few seemed uncomfortable, but none spoke. Then Lucas Grant added another joke, suggesting Ryan could always use the motors as furniture if the repairs failed. The laughter became louder. Ryan remained silent. Years earlier, he might have defended himself. Now he understood that arguing with powerful people rarely changed anything. Instead, he focused his attention on the motors. While everyone else saw junk, Ryan noticed something unusual. Near the edge of one scorched casing, partially hidden beneath layers of damage, was a small stamped symbol. The mark immediately caught his attention. It felt strangely familiar. For a brief moment, memories from years earlier flashed through his mind. He had seen that symbol before, long ago, on technical documents connected to a project that officially no longer existed. The realization was so unexpected that he almost doubted himself. Almost. When bidding opened, nobody wanted the motors. Not a single serious offer appeared. Eventually, the lot sold to Ryan for $1. The room laughed one final time as he completed the paperwork. To everyone else, the transaction looked like the perfect joke. Madison seemed pleased with herself. She had publicly humiliated a former employee and entertained the room at the same time. Ryan signed the documents without saying a word. As workers loaded the 6 motors onto a borrowed trailer, he studied them carefully. The symbol was still there, and the longer he looked at it, the more convinced he became that these machines were not ordinary scrap. By the time he drove away from CorporateDrama's headquarters, a question had already begun forming in his mind. Why would that symbol appear on equipment supposedly destined for destruction? The answer refused to leave him alone. Rain began falling as he arrived at his small workshop later that evening. The building was quiet. Most businesses nearby had already closed for the night. Ryan switched on the overhead lights and slowly unloaded the first motor. The damaged machine was heavier than it looked. After positioning it on a lift table, he walked around it several times, examining every visible detail. The fire damage was real. There was no doubt about that. But something about the construction seemed unusual. The welding patterns looked different from standard production equipment. Certain components appeared far too specialized for ordinary commercial use. The more he observed, the more questions appeared. Outside, rain struck the roof steadily. Inside, Ryan stood alone with 6 burned motors that should have been worthless. Yet every instinct he had developed during years of engineering experience told him otherwise. He ran his hand across the scorched metal one last time, and stared at the faded symbol hidden beneath the damage. If his memory was correct, Carter Dynamics had not accidentally sold him scrap. They had accidentally sold him something much more valuable. Something they never intended anyone outside the company to see. And for the first time in many years, Ryan felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The next morning, Ryan began dismantling the first motor. At first glance, the damage appeared exactly as severe as everyone had assumed. The outer casing was badly burned. Several internal components were broken beyond repair. Any ordinary buyer would have taken one look and sent the entire unit to a recycling yard. Ryan kept going. Years of experience had taught him that machines often revealed their secrets only to people willing to look deeper. As he carefully removed damaged components, he noticed details that immediately caught his attention. The motor had not been built like a standard production model. Certain parts showed signs of hand finishing rather than factory assembly. Specialized materials appeared in places where Carter Dynamics had never publicly used them. Even the internal layout looked different from anything sold on the commercial market. The deeper Ryan explored, the more convinced he became that this motor had once belonged to a highly confidential project. Then he found something even more important. Part of a serial code had been intentionally damaged. Someone had tried to erase its identity, but not completely. Using magnification equipment, Ryan managed to recover enough of the markings to confirm his suspicions. This motor had originated from a research program that was never supposed to leave company archives. Memories from years earlier began returning. Before the fire that destroyed his career, Ryan had worked on a revolutionary motor concept designed to dramatically improve energy efficiency while reducing overheating problems. Management had publicly declared the project too risky after the accident. According to official records, development had ended immediately. Yet the evidence sitting on his workbench told a very different story. Someone inside Carter Dynamics had continued working on the technology long after Ryan was forced out. For the next several days, he examined all 6 motors. A pattern gradually emerged. Each motor represented a different stage of development. One focused on efficiency improvements. Another tested cooling systems. Another contained advanced monitoring equipment. Separately, they appeared incomplete. Together, they formed pieces of a much larger design. By the end of the week, Ryan realized he was looking at something extraordinary. The 6 motors represented years of hidden research. More importantly, they proved that Carter Dynamics had continued developing ideas connected to the very project they had blamed him for destroying. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Inside one damaged control unit, Ryan found a partially melted data storage device. The drive was damaged, but not completely destroyed. If any information remained accessible, it could answer questions that had haunted him for years. Recovering the data would take time, but even without opening the files, Ryan understood the importance of what he had found. For the first time since losing his career, he possessed physical evidence that the official story might not be true. While Ryan worked quietly inside his shop, events were unfolding inside Carter Dynamics. News of the auction eventually reached company leadership. Madison casually repeated the story during an internal meeting, describing how she had sold 6 burned motors to Ryan for $1. Several executives laughed. One person did not. Lucas Grant. The moment he heard the lot number mentioned, his expression changed. After the meeting ended, he immediately reviewed internal records. What he found made his stomach tighten. Those 6 motors had never been approved for public auction. They belonged to a research archive that should have been permanently destroyed years earlier. Somewhere within the liquidation process, an administrative mistake had allowed them to enter the sale inventory. Lucas understood the danger immediately. Most buyers would never recognize their significance. Ryan Cole would, and if Ryan began examining them closely, he might discover things that were never supposed to become public. For years, Lucas had believed the past was buried. Now, he wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, Madison remained unconcerned. In her mind, Ryan was still a struggling repairman working out of a rented workshop. She could not imagine him becoming a threat to a corporation worth billions of dollars. Lucas felt differently. A few days later, Carter Dynamics quietly sent a representative to Ryan's workshop with an offer. The company wanted to buy the motors back, $5,000. Ryan listened carefully. Then he asked a simple question. If they're worthless scrap, why are they suddenly worth $5,000? The representative had no convincing answer. Ryan politely declined the offer. After the visitor left, he stood alone inside the workshop and thought about what had just happened. A company that had laughed while selling him the motors now wanted them back. That told him everything he needed to know. The 6 burned machines were hiding something important, and whatever that secret was, Carter Dynamics was becoming increasingly nervous that Ryan might uncover it. After refusing Carter Dynamics' offer, Ryan became even more careful with his work. He documented everything. Every photograph, every measurement, every discovery hidden inside the 6 motors. The more he studied them, the clearer the picture became. What sat inside his workshop was not merely evidence of a hidden research project. It was a roadmap to something better than anything Carter Dynamics currently sold. Ryan knew he could not simply copy what he had found. Instead, he began using the lessons hidden inside the 6 motors to design something entirely new. Night after night, he worked at a small desk surrounded by sketches, diagrams, and notes. The workshop lights often remained on, long after midnight. For the first time in years, he felt excited about engineering again, not because he wanted revenge, because he finally had a chance to build something of his own. Eventually, he gave the project a name, ColdDrive. The name was simple, but it represented everything he had learned from the mistakes of the past. Building a working prototype proved far more difficult than designing one. Money was scarce. Ryan sold equipment he rarely used and delayed purchases wherever possible. He reused components from older machines and spent countless hours adapting parts that larger companies would have simply replaced. Every dollar mattered. Every mistake cost time he could barely afford. The first prototype failed almost immediately. Moments after activation, the system overloaded and shut down. Weeks of work disappeared in seconds. Ryan stared at the silent machine without saying a word. Failure was familiar territory. He had spent years living with it, but this time felt different. This time he knew he was close. A few nights later, Hannah found him asleep at his workbench. Blueprints covered the table. Tools lay scattered nearby. Without waking him, she placed a blanket over his shoulders. The next morning, Ryan noticed a handwritten note beside his coffee mug. "Don't quit, Dad. You always fix everything." He smiled. It was only a few words, but they stayed with him throughout the day. Whenever frustration threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered why he started. Not for recognition, not for headlines. For Hannah, the second prototype performed better. It ran for several seconds before failing under pressure. For many people, that would have looked like another defeat. To Ryan, it was progress. The numbers showed that the efficiency improvements were working. The concept was sound. He simply needed more time and more resources. Around that time, Evelyn Brooks visited the workshop. She had been helping Ryan protect the legal documentation surrounding the 6 motors and the discoveries he had made. After reviewing his progress, she encouraged him to continue recording every stage of development. If Carter Dynamics ever attempted legal action, those records could become extremely important. More importantly, she believed in the project. Ryan wasn't entirely sure he believed in himself yet, but Evelyn did. As development continued, she introduced him to someone who might be interested in seeing the prototype. His name was Mason Reed, a veteran investor with decades of experience evaluating industrial technology. Unlike many investors, Mason wasn't impressed by presentations or marketing. He cared about results. When he arrived at the workshop, Ryan offered no sales pitch. He simply demonstrated the machine. The prototype started. The system stabilized. And for the first time, everything worked. The motor ran smoothly and consumed significantly less energy than comparable commercial models. Mason checked the readings himself. Then he checked them again. The numbers remained the same. For several moments, he said nothing. Finally, he looked at Ryan and asked a single question. What would it take to bring this to market? Ryan hesitated. He had spent years watching powerful people take credit for other people's work. Trust did not come easily anymore. Mason seemed to understand. He told Ryan that he wasn't interested in controlling the technology. He wanted to invest in the person who had built it. Weeks later, with Mason providing the first round of funding and Evelyn helping establish the legal framework, ColdDrive officially became a company. The business was still small. The workshop was still crowded. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time since losing his career, Ryan was no longer rebuilding his life alone. And far across the city, without fully realizing it yet, Carter Dynamics was about to face a competitor they had accidentally created themselves. ColdDrive's first customer was not a large corporation. It was a small manufacturing company struggling with rising energy costs. The owner wasn't interested in revolutionary technology or ambitious promises. He only wanted equipment that worked and helped reduce expenses. Ryan understood that perfectly. He installed one of the first commercial ColdDrive units and waited. Within weeks, the results became impossible to ignore. Energy consumption dropped noticeably. Maintenance requirements decreased. The equipment ran cooler and more efficiently than the motors the company had used before. Most importantly, the customer was satisfied. That single success led to another, then another. Soon, business owners from neighboring towns began asking questions. They wanted to know who had built the new motors and why they were performing so well. Ryan didn't spend money on advertising. He couldn't afford to. Instead, ColdDrive grew through something far more powerful. Results. Customers shared their experiences with other customers. Factory owners compared operating costs. Managers exchanged recommendations. Slowly but steadily, orders began arriving faster than Ryan's small team could complete them. The workshop stayed busy late into the evening. Additional technicians were hired. Storage space expanded. For the first time in years, Ryan stopped worrying about losing the business. ColdDrive was becoming something real. Despite the growing success, Ryan refused to forget where he started. He continued working alongside his employees, often arriving before everyone else and leaving after everyone had gone home. The original workshop remained the center of operations. To outsiders, ColdDrive still looked like a small company. But inside the industry, people were starting to pay attention, especially inside Carter Dynamics. The first warning sign appeared when one of Carter Dynamics' long-term clients delayed renewing a major service agreement. Soon afterward, several other customers began requesting lower prices. When asked why, they all pointed to the same reason: ColdDrive. The name started appearing more frequently in internal reports. At first, Madison Blake paid little attention. She had spent years running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Small competitors appeared all the time. Most disappeared just as quickly. But the reports kept coming. More customers were mentioning ColdDrive. More engineers were discussing its performance. More buyers were asking questions. Eventually, Madison requested a detailed review. She expected to discover another temporary startup benefiting from industry hype. Instead, she found something unexpected. The performance data was legitimate. Independent testing confirmed the efficiency improvements. Customer satisfaction levels were unusually high, and the company behind the technology was growing faster than anyone had predicted. Then she saw the founder's name, Ryan Cole. For several seconds, she simply stared at the report. The name felt almost impossible. The struggling repairman she had mocked at the auction was now leading the company, appearing in front of her own customers. Madison tried to laugh it off. She told her executives that one successful product did not make a serious competitor. But the confidence in her voice wasn't quite as strong as before. Across the conference table, Lucas Grant remained silent. Unlike Madison, he understood exactly how dangerous the situation had become. He knew where ColdDrive's story had started. He knew what Ryan might eventually discover, and he knew that every new customer brought Ryan one step closer to gaining the resources needed to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Ryan remained focused on the future. He wasn't thinking about Carter Dynamics. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about building the best technology he possibly could. But whether he realized it or not, the company that had once laughed at him was finally paying attention. And the people responsible for destroying his career were beginning to understand that Ryan Cole was no longer a forgotten man, working alone in a small repair shop. He was becoming a threat, a very serious one. As ColdDrive continued growing, pressure inside Carter Dynamics increased. More customers were asking questions. More contracts were being delayed. More industry experts were discussing Ryan Cole's technology. Madison viewed the situation as a business problem. Lucas Grant viewed it as a personal threat. Unlike anyone else inside the company, Lucas knew exactly how dangerous Ryan's success had become. Every new customer gave Ryan more resources. Every new investor gave him more credibility. And sooner or later, Ryan would uncover the truth Lucas had spent years hiding. Fear pushed Lucas toward a desperate decision. Without informing Madison or the board, he hired someone to sabotage ColdDrive. The attack came the night before an important product demonstration for a major potential client. When Ryan arrived at the workshop the following morning, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Part of the electrical system had been damaged. Critical testing equipment had failed. One of the primary prototypes had suffered significant damage. For a brief moment, it looked as if months of work might collapse overnight. The demonstration was only hours away. Several employees feared the contract was already lost, but Ryan remained calm. Years of hardship had taught him that panic solved nothing. As he examined the damaged equipment, something caught his attention. The failure pattern looked familiar, very familiar. The more he investigated, the more disturbing the similarities became. The sabotage resembled the same type of failure that had destroyed his career years earlier. A safety system had been deliberately overridden. A warning signal had been ignored. The machine had not failed naturally. Someone had forced it to fail. Evelyn immediately began comparing the evidence with data recovered from the 6 motors. What she discovered changed everything. The same override signature appeared in both cases. The digital fingerprint connected directly to an old administrative account used years earlier at Carter Dynamics. An account linked to Lucas Grant. For years, Ryan had suspected the original accident wasn't his fault. Now he finally had evidence. The fire that destroyed his career had never been caused by his design. Someone had replaced approved materials with cheaper alternatives. When warning systems detected danger, those warnings had been disabled. And when the project failed, blame had been redirected toward Ryan. The truth that had remained buried for years was finally beginning to surface. Mason wanted to release everything immediately. Evelyn advised patience. The evidence was powerful, but timing mattered. If they acted too soon, Carter Dynamics might attempt to control the narrative. Ryan agreed. Meanwhile, the demonstration still had to happen. Working through the night, Ryan and his team rebuilt the damaged prototype using backup designs and spare components. Nobody slept. Nobody complained. They understood what was at stake. The following morning, Ryan stood before the potential client, tired, exhausted, but ready. The demonstration began. ColdDrive performed flawlessly. The system operated efficiently under heavy load. Safety systems responded exactly as designed. Every test succeeded. By the end of the presentation, the client signed a formal letter of intent. The contract represented a major victory. But something even bigger was coming. Before we continue, if you're enjoying Ryan's story, take a moment to leave a comment below. Have you ever been blamed for something that wasn't your fault? And if you were in Ryan's position, would you seek revenge or simply focus on proving the truth? Now let's see what happened when the truth finally reached Carter Dynamics. News of ColdDrive's success spread rapidly. Investors poured money into the company. Its valuation climbed dramatically, and eventually, Carter Dynamics could no longer ignore reality. A special board meeting was called. Ryan received an invitation. The location was impossible to miss. The same boardroom where he had once been humiliated. The same room where people had laughed while Madison sold him 6 broken motors for $1. Only this time, everything was different. Ryan entered as the founder of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the industry. Silence filled the room. Madison attempted one final strategy. She proposed a partnership, a merger, a chance to move forward without exposing painful details from the past. Ryan listened respectfully, then he calmly refused. He told the board that he wasn't interested in private deals. He wanted the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. At that moment, Evelyn placed the evidence before the directors. Auction records, development logs, recovered data, technical reports, and proof linking Lucas Grant to both the original accident and the recent sabotage attempt. The room fell silent. Lucas tried to defend himself, but every explanation collapsed under the weight of the evidence. For years, he had built his career on a lie. Now that lie was finally exposed. The board immediately suspended him pending investigation. Madison sat quietly as the reality settled around her. She had not created the original deception, but she had helped create a culture where arrogance, humiliation, and abuse of power could flourish. And now, she was being forced to confront the consequences. The people who once laughed at Ryan were no longer laughing. For the first time in many years, the truth was finally winning. In the months that followed, the consequences reached everyone involved. Lucas Grant lost everything he had spent years protecting. Investigations confirmed his role in both the original cover-up and the recent sabotage attempt. The lie that had built his career finally collapsed under the weight of the truth. Ryan's professional record was officially corrected. The engineer once blamed for a catastrophic failure was finally cleared of all responsibility. Madison eventually visited Ryan's original workshop alone. There were no cameras, no reporters, no executives, only a woman forced to confront the consequences of her own arrogance. She apologized sincerely for the way she had treated him. Ryan listened quietly. Then he told her that the hardest years of his life had taught him something important. People cannot control what others do to them, but they can choose what they become because of it. That evening, Ryan returned home and found Hannah waiting for him. She wrapped her arms around him and smiled. For the first time in many years, he no longer had to prove anything to anyone. The truth had finally spoken for itself. And it all started with 6 broken motors that everyone else believed were worthless. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment in Ryan's journey? And what would you have done if you were given those 6 broken motors for just $1? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more inspiring stories.